Welcome back to Untold Nightmares. Tonight, we're not exploring quiet neighborhoods or lonely highways. Instead, we're boarding vessels that should have been safe havens of luxury, but instead turned into floating prisons of fear. These are 8 true cruise ship horror stories. Tales of passengers who vanished without a trace, decks that don't appear on any map, midnight gatherings that should never have happened, and voices that rise from the ocean itself. Stories gathered from survivors, crew whispers, and accounts that were never meant to reach the public. If you're new here, subscribe to Untold Nightmares for more true horror that doesn't just haunt your dreams. It follows you long after the screen goes dark. And for the rest of you, tighten your life jacket, because once these ships leave port, there's no turning back. Now, let's step aboard and see what horrors the sea is hiding. There's something about cruise ships that makes you forget you're floating on the ocean. They're too big, too self-contained, too polished. Pools, restaurants, theaters, shopping malls, even tiny parks with fake grass and trees. It's all there, stacked on top of each other in steel and glass. The first time you step aboard, you feel small. The second day, you feel lucky. By the third day, you start thinking of the ship less like a vessel and more like a world. And that was exactly how I felt last July when my buddy Jason convinced me to take a 7-day Caribbean cruise. He worked at a travel agency and got a heavy employee discount, so it was basically half price for me. I'd never been on one before, and he swore it would be the best vacation of my life. At first, it was. Our cabin was tiny, barely enough space to stand between the beds, but we spent almost no time there. We roamed the buffet, swam in pools, got lost in the casino, even watched a Broadway-style show with glitter and fake snow falling from the rafters. It was so much stimulation, I didn't have time to think about work, bills, or the nagging loneliness I'd been dragging around for months. The ship kept me distracted. That was the point. But by the third night, I started noticing the edges. It was close to midnight, and Jason was drunk off his ass in the nightclub. I left him there, figuring he'd stumble back to the room eventually, and decided to take a walk. The decks were calmer after dark. Families gone to bed, kids no longer screaming in the pools, just the hum of engines and the occasional shuffle of someone heading back from the bar. I drifted down a carpeted corridor, past framed photos of tropical ports we hadn't reached yet. The air smelled faintly of chlorine and fried food. At the end of the hall was a stairwell I didn't recognize. It wasn't on the route we usually took to get back to our cabin. That's when my curiosity got the better of me. The stairwell was narrower than the others, the lights dimmer, the steps metal instead of carpeted. It looked more industrial, less for guests and more for staff. I hesitated, but I'd had a couple drinks myself, and that restless curiosity that comes when the world feels slightly off kilter pushed me down the steps. 1 flight, 2, 3. The air grew cooler. The faint music from the nightclub above disappeared, swallowed by the hum of the engine somewhere deep below. My footsteps echoed. I felt like I was slipping into the bones of the ship. At the bottom was a door. No markings, no crew-only sign. Just gray metal. I pushed it open and stepped onto a deck I didn't know existed. The first thing I noticed was the quiet. Not the pleasant quiet of night, but a hollow quiet, like the air itself had been drained of sound. The second thing I noticed was the size. The deck stretched long and flat, empty, except for a few deck chairs lined against the railing. But the strangest part was the view. On a normal deck, you'd see other parts of the ship, balconies above, windows glowing with cabin lights, the faint shimmer of the pool area. Here, there was nothing, just open black ocean stretching to the horizon. No ship above me, no ship below, as if this level floated in a bubble outside the vessel itself. My stomach tightened. I turned to go back through the door, except the door wasn't there. I froze. My hand touched cold metal where the doorway had been seconds before. Solid wall, smooth and seamless. That's when I realized I wasn't alone. 3 people sat in the chairs closest to the railing. I hadn't noticed them before, but there they were, still as statues. A woman in a pale floral dress, a man in suspenders, another in a collared shirt. Their clothes were wrong, old-fashioned, decades out of style. They stared straight ahead at the black water, hands folded in their laps, motionless. Hi, I said, my voice small in the vast quiet. None of them moved. I forced myself to walk closer. The air grew colder. My breath fogged faintly, even though it had been warm everywhere else on the ship. I stopped a few feet away. Do you know how to get back inside? The man in suspenders turned his head just slightly. His face was pale, too pale, like wax. His mouth sagged open, but no sound came out. My heart thudded painfully in my chest. I stumbled back, eyes darting to the woman. Slowly, mechanically, she raised her hand and pointed to the far end of the deck. There was a door there. I didn't hesitate. I bolted, the cold air slicing my lungs, my footsteps too loud against the steel floor. I yanked the door open and stumbled into another stairwell. This one was bright, clean, filled with the low hum of fluorescent lights. I climbed 2 steps at a time until I burst out near the buffet on deck 9. Warm air, laughter, the clatter of dishes. The world slammed back into me all at once. I leaned against the wall, shaking. Maybe it was a crew area. Maybe I'd gotten turned around. Maybe the alcohol had made me hallucinate the whole thing. I told myself all of that, desperate to believe it. But when I checked the ship map mounted on the wall, my blood ran cold. The deck I'd just been on didn't exist. The next morning, I tried to brush it off. I didn't tell Jason. He was too busy sleeping off his hangover anyway. We had breakfast at the buffet, and for a while I almost forgot about it. Until I noticed the family. They were at the table next to us, a mom, dad, and their teenage daughter. The mom was crying, clutching at a waiter's sleeve. She kept saying their son was gone, that he'd been in the cabin with them when they went to sleep, but when they woke up the bed was empty. The waiter looked confused. He kept checking his notepad, repeating that no child had been checked into their cabin at all. Their reservation only listed 3 guests. The dad grew angry, demanding to speak to the captain. The mom begged other passengers to say they'd seen him at dinner the night before. Nobody had. And when she pulled out her phone to show a picture, her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped it. The photo was wrong. Instead of 4 people smiling in front of the pool, there were only 3. Her son wasn't in the picture. The photo had changed. Jason laughed nervously, muttering that they were crazy, probably drunk. But the look on that woman's face, that wild, helpless panic, I recognized it. It was the same fear I'd felt standing on that deck, staring at pale faces in the dark. Because I knew, deep down, where her son had gone. I couldn't eat after that. Jason plowed through pancakes and bacon like nothing was wrong, but every bite turned to ash in my mouth. The image of that mother shaking, clutching her phone, screaming that her boy had been there only yesterday. It stuck with me. Because I believed her. I didn't want to, but I did. When we left the buffet, Jason went to the casino, and I wandered the ship alone. I told myself I was just stretching my legs, but the truth was I was looking for it. That stairwell, that door, that impossible deck. Part of me wanted proof it had happened. Part of me wanted to convince myself it hadn't. I searched for nearly an hour before I found it. Same narrow hall, same stairwell with the metal steps instead of carpet. Same hum of the ship falling away the deeper I went. My stomach churned as I reached the bottom. The door was waiting. My hand shook as I touched the handle. The metal was cold. I pushed it open. The deck stretched out before me, silent, endless. And there they were again, The passengers in old clothes sitting stiffly in their chairs, staring at the sea. Only now, there were more of them, at least a dozen. Men, women, even children. Their clothes spanned decades, an old-fashioned sailor cap on a boy, a woman in bell-bottoms, a man in a Hawaiian shirt, faded by time. They all sat perfectly still, pale faces fixed toward the horizon. My chest tightened. I scanned their faces, praying I wouldn't recognize any of them. Then I saw him. The boy from breakfast. The one whose mother had been screaming in the buffet. He sat at the end of the row, small hands folded neatly in his lap, eyes dull and gray. I staggered back, bile rising in my throat. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to exist. And yet there he was, erased from his family's life, but still here. "Hey!" My voice cracked as I shouted. "Can you hear me?" The boy didn't move. None of them did. But somewhere behind me, the door clicked shut. I spun around. The door I'd entered was gone. Solid wall. My pulse roared in my ears. I tried the railing. Cold metal. Unyielding. I tried calling out again, screaming until my throat burned. Nothing. The silence swallowed it all. Then slowly one of the passengers turned. It was the woman in the floral dress I'd seen before. She rose from her chair in a stiff, jerking motion, her limbs bending wrong, like her joints were rusted. She took one step toward me, then another. Her face was blank, but her eyes locked on mine. I backed up, tripping over my own feet. My shoulders slammed against the wall. And then, just as suddenly, she stopped. Her head tilted, and she raised her hand again, pointing to the far end of the deck. Another door. It hadn't been there before. I ran. My footsteps echoed too loudly. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of salt and rust. I yanked the door open and stumbled through. Into another stairwell. I bolted up the steps, heart hammering, until I spilled out onto deck 11 near the pool. Sunlight. Music. Kids splashing. The world slammed back into place, bright and loud. I doubled over, gasping, sweat dripping down my face. I didn't go back to Jason right away. I couldn't. I spent hours pacing the ship, staring at passengers, wondering which ones might disappear next. Every child made my stomach twist. Every family photo on someone's phone made me shudder. By dinner, I thought maybe I'd imagined it again. Maybe stress and booze and sunstroke had scrambled my brain. I almost believed that, until it happened again. At the late-night show in the theater, a man stood up mid-performance, shouting that his wife was missing. Staff rushed to calm him, insisting his cabin had been booked solo. No record of a wife. No trace of her belongings. I wanted to scream at them, tell them I knew where she was, but I didn't. Because who would believe me? The last night of the cruise, Jason crashed early, drunk and sunburned. I lay awake in the cabin, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the engines. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that boy, pale and still, staring out at the sea. Around 2 a.m., I couldn't take it anymore. I got up, slipped out of the cabin, and wandered the halls. My feet led me back, as if the ship itself wanted me there. The stairwell waited. I went down. The door opened, and the deck was full. Dozens now, rows of passengers stretching end to end. Men, women, children, their faces blank, their skin pale, their bodies still. The air was icy, my breath fogging in front of me. And there, in the front row, was Jason, his hands folded neatly in his lap, his eyes dull and gray, his face slack. I froze. My knees buckled. No. We'd had dinner together just hours earlier. He'd fallen asleep in the cabin. He couldn't be here. But he was. And when his head turned toward me, eyes locking on mine, I knew the truth. He'd been erased. I staggered back, chest heaving, tears burning my eyes. I screamed his name, begged him to move, to speak, to do anything. He didn't. None of them did. Then, all at once, they rose. Every pale figure stood, moving in that stiff, jerking way, their heads turning in unison toward me. I stumbled, clawed at the wall, searching for a door, an exit, anything. The steel was cold, seamless, no way out. They stepped forward, one step, then another. Closer, closer. The cold wrapped around me like a shroud. My lungs seized, my vision blurred, and then I was back, lying in my cabin bed, morning sunlight streaming through the porthole, Jason snoring in the other bed. For one brief, blessed moment, I thought it had been a nightmare, until I turned my head and saw the photo. On the nightstand, beside Jason's phone, was a printed picture we'd taken on the first day of the cruise. Me and him, smiling with drinks in our hands, the ship's pool behind us. Only now, it was just me. Jason was gone. Not just from the photo, from the ship. His bed was empty, his clothes gone, his name missing from the cabin records. The staff insisted I was traveling alone. I screamed until my throat tore, begged them to check again, but no one listened. No one remembered him. And that night, on the last evening of the cruise, I found myself drifting down that narrow hall one final time. The stairwell waited. The door opened, and the vanishing deck was full. Every chair occupied, every pale face turned toward the sea. And when I looked down the row, I saw myself, sitting stiffly, hands folded, eyes dull and gray, watching the ocean. Cruise ships like to sell you the dream of old-world luxury. They want you to forget you're packed onto a floating city with thousands of strangers, and instead imagine yourself as some aristocrat gliding across the Atlantic in the golden age of travel. Chandeliers, velvet curtains, crystal glassware, they overcompensate so hard that it almost works. The ship I boarded last spring had one centerpiece that outshined everything else, the ballroom. It was 2 decks tall, glass ceiling arching high enough to see the stars when the night was clear, and wide enough to swallow 3 basketball courts. A grand staircase curved down into the polished floor like something out of a black and white movie, and when the chandeliers lit up, dripping with hundreds of glass teardrops, it was like stepping into a cathedral built to worship elegance itself. I hadn't planned on spending much time there. I wasn't that kind of person. I was 31, jeans and t-shirt kind of guy, more comfortable in a sports bar than a tuxedo. But my girlfriend at the time, Taryn, loved the idea of dressing up for a gala at sea. She spent half our budget on a gown and heels, and when she walked into the ballroom that first night, even I had to admit it felt like stepping into a dream. There were couples waltzing across the floor, sequins glinting like sparks. Waiters in pressed jackets moved with trays of champagne flutes that tinkled softly when they brushed past. A string quartet played on the raised stage, their bows carving long, sweet notes through the air. For a while, I let myself believe I belonged there. We drank, we danced, we laughed, and by midnight I was feeling loose, comfortable, maybe even impressed. It didn't feel like a ship anymore. It felt like the world had shrunk down to chandeliers and music and the warmth of Taryn's hand in mine. But just past midnight, I noticed something strange. It started subtle. A waiter walked past us, his tray balanced high. He stepped straight into a patch of shadow near the wall, and when the tray dipped into it, I didn't hear the clink of glasses anymore. When he stepped back into the light, the champagne flutes were gone. The tray was empty. He didn't react. He just kept walking, his eyes glassy. I told myself I'd imagined it. But then the music faltered. Not stopped. Faltered. The first violin held a note too long. The second's bow hovered, twitching, before dragging again. It was like their arms were moving without will, a mechanical echo of the song they were supposed to be playing. People kept dancing, but slower now, movement stiff. I squeezed Taryn's hand. "Do you see that?" She frowned, nodded slightly, but before either of us could move, the first drop fell. It hit the floor with a soft splash, so faint I almost thought it was a trick of my ears. Then another, and another. I looked up at the glass ceiling, expecting condensation. But there were no leaks. The night sky was clear, stars sharp as pinpricks. Still, the drops spread across the polished floor, dark circles staining the wood. Within seconds, there was a film of water that reflected the chandeliers in jagged fragments. The dancers' shoes left ripples as they moved. "Must be some busted pipe," I muttered, but my voice shook. Taryn didn't answer. She was staring at the reflection. I followed her gaze. The water wasn't reflecting us. It was reflecting someone else. At first, I thought it was a trick of the chandeliers, some weird doubling effect. But then, the shapes clarified. Pale faces, bloated skin, eyes swollen and glassy, mouths slack and yawning. They floated just beneath the surface, hair drifting as though they were suspended in invisible tides. Their hands reached up now and then, pressing against the underside of the water, as if they were trapped behind glass. The water kept rising. It didn't pour from the ceiling, didn't gush from vents. It simply thickened, swelling upward until it reached our shoes. The quartet kept sawing at their strings, stiff and jerky, bows dripping with water that wasn't there. The dancers kept spinning, gowns dragging through the growing flood, but their faces were wrong, blank, expressionless. Some had eyes that rolled loosely in their sockets like they were dolls propped upright. Others had mouths fixed in smiles that stretched too far. And still, none of them stopped dancing. I tried to pull Taryn toward the door, but she froze, staring at the water with wide eyes. "They're looking at us," she whispered. And she was right. The drowned faces in the water were no longer drifting aimlessly. They were angled upward, gazes locked on us. Dozens of them, eyes bulging, mouths yawning. Their bodies shifted closer, pressing against the surface. A pale hand broke through. It wasn't wet. It didn't drip. It simply breached like the water wasn't water at all but a window being opened. The hand reached upward, twitching, nails cracked and black. I yanked Taryn's arm. "We need to move, now!" We pushed through the dancers, splashing through water that had reached our calves. The music warped, notes stretching into screams of strings. My chest tightened, every breath sharp with the stench of brine. Then the water surged. 1 second it was knee-deep. The next it was at our waists, icy cold, pulling us down. I gasped, the shock stealing my breath, dragging at my legs like anchors. I fought against it, clawing toward the doors. The dancers closed in, their movements jerky, mechanical. Their hands reached out, brushing against my arms, my shoulders cold as marble. Their faces turned toward us, eyes glassy, mouths opening wider, wider, until salt water spilled from them in streams. Taryn screamed. The sound cut sharp through the air, and every drowned face in the water turned toward her. They surged upward in unison, pale arms breaking the surface, gray fingers clawing. The dancers stopped, froze in place, and tilted their heads in a perfect sync. All of them were looking at her. I grabbed her waist, shoved her forward. The ballroom doors loomed ahead, warped and dripping. My legs burned, every step heavy in the water that had climbed to my chest. My suit clung to me, freezing cold. We reached the doors. I shoved one open. The hallway was dry. The carpet stretched clean under yellow light. A faint murmur of voices from distant cabins. The air warm and dry against my soaked skin. I dragged Taryn through, slamming the door behind us. When I turned back, my heart lurched. We were dry. Our clothes weren't wet. My skin wasn't cold. No water dripped from us. The hall was spotless, not a trace of a flood. Taryn pressed her back to the wall, shaking. What the hell was that? Tell me you saw it too." I didn't answer. My throat was too dry. Instead, I turned back to the ballroom doors. Music played faintly beyond them. Laughter, the clink of glasses, the same waltz as before, like nothing had happened. My hand hovered over the handle. I wanted to look again to see if it had all been in my head, but Taryn grabbed my wrist. Her nails dug in. "Don't," she whispered. Whatever that was, it saw us. I didn't sleep that night. Even after we got back to the cabin, every time I closed my eyes, I felt the water on my skin again, rising higher, dragging me down. I heard the bows of the quartet screeching against strings, that warped, endless note. And worst of all, I kept seeing those faces, bloated gray, staring up at me from beneath the floor. Taryn begged me not to talk about it. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands trembling as she untied her heels. "If we pretend it didn't happen, maybe it won't happen again," she whispered. But her eyes were bloodshot, her voice too thin to believe her own words. The next morning, the ship carried on like nothing had happened. Families laughed over breakfast. Sunburned kids ran screaming through the pool deck. The announcements cheerfully reminded us about the day's excursions. Nobody mentioned a flood. Nobody mentioned anything strange at all. For a while, I convinced myself it had been a hallucination, too much champagne, the brain playing tricks in a room designed to overwhelm the senses. But then, just after lunch, I overheard something in the buffet line that froze me in place. A woman was whispering to her husband, her face pale. "You saw it, right? The water?" He shushed her quickly, glancing around, but I caught the look in his eyes. He'd seen it too. That was when I realized it wasn't just us. I stayed away from the ballroom for the next 2 nights, even when the ship advertised formal events there. But curiosity has a way of clawing at you. On the 4th night, when Taryn was asleep, I slipped out and walked the ship alone. The closer I got to the ballroom, the heavier the air felt. The carpeted hallways seemed darker, the lights dimmer, though no bulbs were burned out. My footsteps echoed strangely, as though the ship itself was hollow. The double doors loomed at the end of the corridor. I pushed them open. The ballroom glowed as brightly as ever. Chandeliers sparkled, couples twirled, waiters glided with trays. The quartet played a lively waltz. For a moment, I thought maybe everything was fine. Maybe I had lost my mind before. Then I noticed the water line. It was faint, but it was there. A dark stain creeping up the base of the walls just above the molding. Not wet to the touch, not dripping, but permanent. As though water had pressed against the walls from the inside for years. I scanned the dancers' faces. Some were smiling, some were laughing. But here and there, I caught something else. Blank expressions. Wide, staring eyes. A mouth that moved too slowly when it spoke. Lips stretching as though remembering how. And in the reflection of the glass ceiling above, the chandeliers didn't sparkle gold. They sparkled blue, like refracted light from beneath the sea. I backed away, heart pounding. My shoulder hit someone. A man in a tuxedo stood behind me, his hair plastered to his head as if it were still wet. He smiled too widely. "Care for a dance?" Before I could answer, he melted back into the crowd. I bolted for the doors. The next morning, another announcement rattled through the ship. "Attention passengers. Due to unforeseen maintenance, the ballroom will be closed this evening. Thank you for your understanding." But that night, I saw the lights burning anyway. Through the cracks of the doors, chandeliers glimmered. Music played faintly. I pressed my ear to the door. Voices murmured, warped and distant like sound traveling through water. A laugh echoed, deep and wet. And then I heard the screech of bows on strings, the same note that had burned into my skull before. I pulled back, stomach churning. When I turned, I saw her. A woman in a soaked ball gown stood at the end of the corridor, staring at me. Her skin was gray, her eyes cloudy, hair dripping across her shoulders. She raised a hand slowly, pointing at the ballroom doors. And then she vanished. On the final night of the cruise, Taryn begged me not to go back. She clutched my arm, tears in her eyes. Please, just leave it alone. We're almost home. But I couldn't. I needed to know. I waited until midnight, then slipped out of the cabin. The halls were quiet, the ship rocking gently against black water. When I reached the ballroom, the doors stood wide open. Inside, the room was flooded waist-deep. Chandeliers still glowed overhead, their light bending strangely through the water. Couples drifted across the floor, their clothes trailing in slow currents, movements jerky as though dragged by strings. Waiters glided past, trays balanced above the surface, though their faces remained blank, eyes glassy. The quartet played on, their instruments half submerged, notes warping into long, distorted groans. And in the center of the ballroom, pale figures rose slowly from the depths. Drowned passengers, dozens of them, reaching, staring, mouths yawning wide. My breath caught, because among them I saw Taryn. Her blue gown floated around her hair, drifting like seaweed. Her eyes were wide, lips parted in a silent scream. She raised one hand, reaching toward me. "No," I whispered. I stumbled forward, but the water surged higher, chest deep, icy cold, pulling me under. My lungs seized. The chandeliers blurred above me, their light breaking into shards. Hands clawed at my arms, pale faces pressing close, mouths gaping. I tried to scream, but water filled my throat. The last thing I saw was her face, pressed inches from mine, eyes begging, before the darkness swallowed me whole. I woke up in my cabin the next morning, dry. Clothes folded neatly on the chair. Taryn's side of the bed was empty. Her suitcase was gone. When I ran to the front desk, they looked at me with confusion. "Sir, your cabin was booked for one passenger only. There's no record of anyone traveling with you." I pulled out my phone, desperate to prove them wrong. But every photo from the cruise showed me alone. Not one of Taryn. Not even in the ballroom, where I knew she had danced with me. Just me, smiling stiffly at the camera, empty space at my side. I didn't believe in cursed cabins, haunted hotels. Sure, I'd read a few stories. Abandoned lighthouses. Fine, that had atmosphere. But a cruise ship cabin, that just sounded like something people whispered to pass the time when the bar closed too early. At least, that's what I thought until last summer, when I found myself stuck in cabin 727. The booking was an accident from the start. I'd picked a budget interior room months before sailing, nothing fancy. I just wanted a week away from work, a chance to eat too much buffet food, and maybe sit on the deck with a drink in hand. But at the port, when I checked in, the woman at the counter frowned at her screen. She typed something, clicked a few times, then excused herself to whisper with her coworker. When she returned, she slid my keycard across the counter and said, "You've been upgraded. Cabin 727, Deck 7, midship." Her smile looked polite, but it didn't reach her eyes. I didn't think much of it at the time. A free upgrade was a free upgrade. But as I rolled my suitcase down the hall on Deck 7, I noticed something strange. The doors had neat brass numbers. 723, 25, 26, then 27. After that, 7029. No cabin, 20. I slowed, frowning at the door. Maybe they skipped numbers like hotels skipped the 13th floor. Maybe 628 had been merged into a bigger suite. But the hairs on my arms prickled as I slid my card into the slot. The lock blinked green. The door opened, and the cold hit me instantly. It wasn't just air conditioning. It was basement cold, graveyard cold. I stepped inside and shut the door behind me, shivering. The cabin was ordinary enough. Queen bed with white linens, a desk and mirror, sliding glass doors that opened to a balcony with heavy curtains pulled across. It was spotless, like it had been cleaned twice, but the air felt heavy, stale, like no one had breathed in here for years. I fiddled with the thermostat, but the vent rattled and spat only more cold air. Rubbing my arms, I told myself it was fine, probably just an overactive cooling system, and unpacked quickly before heading off to explore the ship. The first day passed in a blur, drinks on the deck, an overly cheerful welcome show in the theater, dinner at a crowded buffet where the smell of fried shrimp lingered in my hair. By the time I stumbled back to my cabin, my feet ached and I was ready to collapse. That's when I heard the scratching. At first it was faint, almost lost beneath the hum of the air conditioner. A dragging sound, slow and steady, like a fingernail tracing along plaster. I sat up in bed, listening hard. The sound stopped. I laid back down. The scratching started again, louder this time, right behind the headboard. My stomach knotted. I shoved the blankets off and pressed my ear to the wall. Nothing. Dead silence. I checked the bathroom, the closet, even the balcony door. Nothing out of place. Finally, feeling foolish, I climbed back into bed. That's when I saw it. A handprint on the mirror above the desk. It was faint, greasy, as if someone had pressed their palm flat against the glass. The fingers were long, spread wide. I hadn't touched the mirror. My heart thudded in my chest as I grabbed a towel and wiped it away. The smear disappeared easily, but when I glanced back a moment later, I could have sworn something dark shifted in the reflection. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The next morning, I stopped a housekeeper in the hall. She was pushing a cart stacked with towels, her eyes tired but kind. I asked if I could switch cabins. Her smile faltered. She checked her clipboard, then shook her head. We're at capacity. Every cabin's full. I started to explain about the cold, the scratching, but she cut me off quickly. You'll be fine. Just... She lowered her voice. Keep the balcony locked at night. Then she walked away before I could ask anything else. That evening, I followed her advice. I latched the balcony door. I closed the curtains tight. I left a light on in the bathroom. It didn't matter. The scratching came back, louder than before. It crawled along the ceiling, down the walls, circling the room like something pacing inside the very frame of the cabin. I shoved a pillow over my head, but the sound drilled through the stuffing. I must have dozed eventually because a sharp knocking jolted me awake. 3 knocks. From the closet. I froze, staring at the wooden door across the room. My chest heaved with each breath. Then, 3 more knocks, louder this time. I forced myself to my feet, trembling, and grabbed the handle. The moment I touched it, the knocking stopped. I yanked the door open. Empty. Just my suitcase on the floor, my shirts hanging neatly. I slammed it shut, pulse pounding in my ears. That's when I noticed something wedged between the mirror and the desk. A notebook. It was old, leather cracked, edges swollen like it had been wet once. My hand shook as I pulled it free and opened the cover. The first page was dated almost 20 years ago. The handwriting was jagged, rushed. I can't sleep in here. The scratching won't stop. They told me cabin 727 was closed. They lied. If you find this, don't stay another night. I flipped further, page after page of rambling entries, about cold air that never warmed, about whispers in the dark, about dreams of drowning that left the writer gasping for breath when they woke. The sentences grew more frantic, slanted, until the last legible entry made my skin crawl. It knows my name now. It whispers it when I close my eyes. Tomorrow night, it will take me. The date was circled heavily, over and over. It was the same day of the month as tomorrow. I dropped the notebook onto the desk and backed away. My skin prickled with sweat despite the freezing air. I grabbed my keycard, rushed to the door, and swiped. Red light. Denied. I swiped again. And again. Nothing but the same red blink. The handle refused to turn. I was trapped inside cabin 727. I don't know how long I stood frozen at that locked door, swiping my card again and again until the red light blurred with tears. It didn't matter how hard I pulled or how many times I cursed at it. The handle wouldn't budge. Cabin 727 had decided I wasn't leaving. I told myself there had to be another way out. The balcony, maybe. I shoved the curtains aside and slid the glass door open. The sea air slapped my face, warmer than the freezer-cold cabin behind me. Waves foamed against the hull below, endless black stretching in every direction. For a split second, I thought about climbing over, reaching for the next balcony. But one look down at the 30-foot drop into churning water killed the idea. Then I saw it. A handprint. On the outside of the glass door. It was wet, dripping seawater, the shape distorted like someone had pressed against the pane from the middle of the ocean. I staggered back, slammed the door, and yanked the curtains closed. That's when the mirror fogged. At first it was faint, like condensation after a hot shower, but the haze spread quickly, swallowing my reflection. The glass rippled as if it were alive, as if I were looking at water instead of silver backing. My chest tightened as a face pressed against the inside. Not mine, a woman's. Her eyes were wide, terrified, her lips moving soundlessly. She slammed her palms against the other side of the glass, skin whitening from the pressure. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but then sound bled through, faint and warbled, like voices underwater. Help me. Her mouth opened wider. Please, you have to help me. I stumbled closer, my hand hovering inches from the glass. Who are you? Her features flickered. One moment, young and alive, the next pale and bloated, hair floating as though she were submerged. She convulsed, clawing at the inside of the mirror, eyes rolling back as black water poured from her mouth. Then her image dissolved into dozens of faces. They pressed against the glass in a swarm, mouths open in silent screams, eyes wide and accusing. Men, women, even children, hundreds of them, all crammed behind the surface. The mirror bowed outward as though it could no longer contain them. And over the noise, I heard my name. Not once, not whispered, shouted. They all knew my name. I reeled back, heart slamming in my chest, and that's when I noticed the notebook on the desk. The pages flipped by themselves, faster and faster until they landed on one blank sheet. Dark ink seeped across the paper in jagged strokes. Tonight, it will take you. The lights flickered and went out. The cabin was pitch black except for the glow of the mirror, which pulsed faintly like a heartbeat. I clutched the bed frame, my breath tearing ragged from my throat. The scratching began again. Not from the walls this time, but from inside the mattress. The springs groaned as though something was crawling beneath me, pressing upward. I jumped back, my suitcase clattering to the floor. The scratching shifted to the carpet, the sound of nails tearing across fabric as the shape moved toward me. I bolted for the door and slammed my shoulder into it, screaming for help. My voice echoed, but no one answered. The scratching stopped. Silence dropped heavy. Then 3 knocks rattled the closet door, slow, deliberate. I backed away until my spine hit the cold glass of the balcony. My lungs burned as if the air had thinned, every breath harder than the last. The closet door creaked open by itself. The smell hit me first. Salt water and rot, sharp enough to sting my eyes. Shadows shifted inside the narrow space. Something stepped out. It wasn't a person. It was a shape of dripping black water, limbs half-formed, face smooth and blank, until the liquid stretched and pulled into a mouth that opened far too wide. The sound that came out was like the ocean tearing itself apart. I fell to the floor, scrambling backward, but wherever I looked, mirror, closet, balcony, glass, the shapes pressed closer. Faces in every reflective surface, dozens of hands slapping from the other side, pounding to get through. The notebook flipped another page. This time the words were written in my own handwriting. It knows my name. It knows my family. I can't stop it. I hadn't written it, but the letters were mine. Every curve, every line. No, I whispered. My throat was raw, my hands shaking. No, that's not me. That's not me. The glass of the mirror bulged outward. A crack splintered down the middle. Black water spilled onto the carpet, seeping toward my feet. My reflection looked back at me, except it wasn't moving the way I was. I raised my hand. It stayed still. I stumbled back. It leaned forward. Then it smiled. Not my smile. Too wide. Too sharp. It pressed both hands against the glass, and with a sound like shattering ice, it stepped out. I don't know how long I ran circles inside that cabin, screaming, slamming into walls that seemed to bend and stretch. The air grew thicker, colder, until every breath rattled in my chest like I was already drowning. My double stalked me, every step echoing mine, every move slower but inevitable. When I finally collapsed against the bed, it loomed over me. Its face bent closer, black water dripping onto my skin, its mouth opened. And my daughter's voice came out. "Daddy?" The words shattered me. My whole body went weak, tears spilling hot down my face. I knew it wasn't real. My daughter was home, safe, thousands of miles away, but hearing her voice from that thing's mouth broke something inside me. The creature leaned closer, water rushing into my ears, my nose, my mouth. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't fight. The last thing I saw was my own reflection, pressed against the inside of the mirror again, pounding for release. When I woke, the cabin was silent. The mirror was clean, the closet shut, the balcony locked. For a moment, I thought it had been a nightmare, but then I looked at the desk. The notebook lay open, its latest entry written in jagged letters. It was my name, my date of birth, my daughter's name, and underneath, taken, cabin 727. I lunged for the door. This time the lock clicked green. The handle turned. The hallway outside bustled with passengers in swimsuits and kids running past, laughter echoing like nothing had happened. I stumbled into the light, gasping, clutching the frame of the door. But when I looked back, there was no cabin 727. The door I had come from was numbered 729. The thing about cruises is that they run on schedules. Breakfast at 7, trivia at noon, buffet until 10. Even the mandatory safety drills have their place, once at the very beginning before the ship leaves port. Everyone gathers on deck, life vests strapped over their shoulders, and a crew member demonstrates how to survive in the unlikely event the vessel sinks. I'd been on cruises before. That's how it always worked. So when the announcement jolted me awake at 3 a.m. on the 4th night at sea, I knew something was wrong. The intercom crackled, louder than it ever was during the day. The captain's voice filled the cabin, flat and emotionless. "Attention passengers, mandatory safety muster. All guests must report immediately to Deck 5. Bring your key cards. Do not delay." I sat up in bed, heart pounding. My first thought was that it had to be an emergency, maybe a fire, maybe a leak in the hull. But then I noticed something. The tone of his voice. There was no urgency, no reassurance, just command. I stumbled out of bed, yanked on jeans, and grabbed my jacket. My cabin mate, Ethan, blinked groggily at me from the other bed. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered. "They're calling a muster. At 3 a.m. He rubbed his eyes. "That doesn't happen. Ever." The intercom crackled again. "All guests must comply. Failure to comply will result in removal from voyage." The word sent a chill down my spine. Removal. Not assistance, not rescue. Removal. Ethan swore under his breath, pulled on a hoodie, and followed me out into the hallway. Passengers were filing out of their rooms, all of them bleary-eyed, muttering, couples in pajamas clutching their children's hands, elderly folks leaning on canes, teenagers yawning with headphones still in their ears. The hallway buzzed with confusion, but no one dared ignore the order. We followed the herd toward the stairwell, key cards clutched tight. When we reached Deck 5, crew members were waiting, but something was off about them. They wore the standard uniforms, navy jackets with brass buttons, caps pulled low, but their faces seemed pale under the fluorescent lights. Their eyes didn't track properly, sliding over us like we were shapes instead of people. One of them held out a scanner collecting key cards as we filed past. Cabin number. The man droned each time a passenger tapped their card. He marked something on a clipboard, never looking anyone in the eye. When it was my turn, I handed over my card. He scanned it, paused, then drew a black line through my name. He didn't hand the card back. "Proceed to the starboard lounge," he said flatly. Ethan tapped his card next. His name was marked with a red circle. The crew member handed his card back. "You may return to your cabin." Ethan frowned. "Wait, what? Why is he going somewhere else?" The man didn't answer. He waved Ethan toward the stairs. His eyes never blinked. I tried to argue, but another crew member stepped between us. Her smile stretched too wide, teeth too white. "Starboard lounge, sir. This way." Ethan grabbed my arm. "Don't go with them. This isn't right." The crew member's voice dropped, low and sharp. "Return to your cabin, guest." Ethan's face went pale. He let go of me, looking toward the stairs. I wanted to follow him, to run, but the crew blocked the way. Cold hands on my shoulder turned me toward the lounge. "Starboard side," the man repeated. "Hurry now." The lounge was nothing like I remembered. During the day, it was all glass walls and leather chairs, sunlight pouring in, bartenders mixing cocktails for tourists with sunburns. At 3 a.m, though, it was transformed. The chairs were gone. The bar was covered. The glass walls were blocked by heavy black curtains that swallowed any hint of the ocean outside. Dozens of passengers stood in silence, arranged in neat rows. Their eyes were wide, their shoulders hunched like cattle waiting to be herded. A crew member with a clipboard moved down the rows, checking off names. I spotted a woman I'd seen at dinner 2 nights earlier. She clutched her daughter's hand, whispering in her ear. A man in a business suit muttered prayers under his breath, eyes shut tight. I pushed through the crowd until I reached the woman. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. She shook her head quickly. "I thought it was a drill. But why at night? Why take some people and send others away?" The clipboard snapped shut. The crew member at the front stepped forward. His cap was pulled so low I couldn't see his eyes. "Selected guests," he said, voice cold and monotone. "Thank you for your compliance. You will now proceed below deck for inspection." A shiver ran through the crowd. Inspection. The crew moved in unison, ushering us toward a narrow service stairwell at the side of the lounge. I glanced back at the entrance, wondering if I could make a break for it, but 2 uniformed men stood blocking the doors, arms crossed, faces expressionless. The woman clutched her daughter tighter. The businessman's prayers grew louder. We descended into the bowels of the ship. The deeper we went, the colder it grew. The stairwell walls dripped with condensation, pipes rattling overhead. The air smelled of rust and brine, a sharp metallic tang that made me gag. My sneakers squeaked on the damp steps as we spiraled down and down, far below the passenger decks. Finally, we emerged into a corridor I'd never seen before. Bare steel walls, exposed wiring, no carpet, no artwork, no attempt to disguise the machinery of the ship. The crew herded us single file toward a set of heavy double doors. They creaked open slowly, revealing a cavernous chamber, lit only by swinging bulbs overhead. It wasn't part of the ship's design. It looked older, rougher, like the hold of a freighter grafted onto a modern cruise liner. Chains hung from the ceiling. The floor sloped slightly downward, disappearing into shadow. We were marched inside. The doors slammed shut behind us. That's when the whispers began, not from the passengers, from the walls. They rose low and steady, hundreds of voices layered together, chanting in a language I didn't understand. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end. The child whimpered. The businessman fell to his knees, clutching his chest. A crew member stepped forward, finally pushing his cap back. His eyes were solid black. "The muster is complete," he intoned. "The offering will begin." The black-eyed crewman's voice echoed against the steel walls. "The offering will begin." A ripple of panic surged through the group. The woman holding her daughter pulled her close, shielding her tiny body with her arms. The businessman staggered upright, muttering prayers through trembling lips. I felt my own chest tighten, my lungs squeezing as if the air itself had turned heavy. Behind us, the steel doors clanged shut with a finality that made my stomach twist. Chains rattled overhead, swaying, though no one touched them. The chanting grew louder, the words thick and wet, reverberating inside my skull. The crew moved among us, their movements stiff and synchronized, like puppets on invisible strings. One by one, they began to point at passengers. A young couple was seized first, dragged from the line despite their screaming protests. The black-eyed crew dragged them toward the sloping floor. That's when I realized what waited in the darkness at the far end of the chamber. Water. It wasn't the clean blue pool of the upper decks or the endless ocean outside. This water was black, thick, sluggish. It pulsed faintly, as though alive, seeping through cracks in the steel floor. The couple fought, but the crew's grip was unyielding. They were shoved into the black tide. The water didn't splash. It rose like hands, clutching their limbs, pulling them under without a sound. When the surface stilled, nothing remained, not even bubbles. The child screamed. The mother held her tighter, eyes wild, searching for an escape that wasn't there. Another passenger was chosen, an older woman in a nightgown. She didn't fight. She shuffled forward, whispering something under her breath. When the water embraced her, she went willingly. Within seconds, she was gone. The businessman broke. He shoved past us, sprinting toward the stairwell door, pounding his fists against it. "Let us out, please, somebody." His voice cracked, echoing through the chamber. A crewman turned toward him, his jaw unhinged wider than it should, bones cracking audibly as his mouth stretched open, revealing rows of teeth too sharp, too many. From that mouth poured a sound not meant for human ears, a deep guttural bellow that rattled my ribs. The businessman froze, mid-scream, clutching his chest. His body convulsed once, twice, and then he crumpled to the floor. The crew lifted him effortlessly and carried him to the black tide. It welcomed him like the others. I realized with a kind of cold clarity what this was. The ship wasn't a vessel for us. We were vessels for it. Passengers weren't paying for vacations. They were paying with their lives. A quota collected each voyage, fed to whatever god or monster slumbered in the steel and salt. The chanting swelled, so loud it made my teeth ache. Then it happened. The crewman with the black eyes pointed at me. My stomach dropped. My legs refused to move. Two of them approached, grips cold as iron, dragging me forward. My sneakers scraped against the wet floor. My throat closed around the scream building inside me. "Please," I croaked. "Please, not me." The crew said nothing. Their black eyes gleamed in the swinging light. I was shoved to the edge of the black tide. The smell was unbearable, like rotting kelp mixed with rust and decay. The water pulsed upward, tendrils reaching for my ankles. The child cried out, "Stop, stop, don't take him." The crew hesitated. Their heads turned toward her in eerie unison. Her mother's voice broke. "Please, take me instead, please." The black-eyed man regarded her for a long, terrible moment. Then slowly, he nodded. The crew released me. I collapsed to the floor, gasping. They seized the woman. She didn't fight. She kissed her daughter's forehead, whispering something I couldn't hear, and then she was pulled into the black tide. Her daughter wailed, small hands reaching out. But the crew didn't touch her. Children, it seemed, were spared. For now. The water swallowed the mother whole. When it stilled, the chamber went silent. The crew stepped back, their jaws snapping shut with a sickening crack. The black-eyed man spoke again. The offering is complete. Return to your cabins. The doors creaked open. We stumbled out, those of us left alive, faces pale, bodies shaking. The little girl clutched my hand, sobbing into her sleeve. I led her up the stairwell back into the false warmth of the passenger decks. When we reached the lounge, everything was back in place. Chairs, tables, bar stocked neatly with bottles. It looked as if nothing had happened. The other passengers, the ones who hadn't been summoned, were asleep in their cabins, dreaming safe dreams, unaware of what had transpired below. I returned the girl to her cabin, where her grandmother was waiting. The old woman hugged her fiercely, eyes brimming with tears. When she asked where her daughter was, I couldn't answer. I went back to my own room. Ethan sat up when I entered, eyes bleary with sleep. "Where the hell were you, man? I came back from muster and you were gone." I stared at him, throat tight. You didn't see." "See what?" "They just checked my card and sent me back to bed." I collapsed onto the bed, shaking. Ethan frowned, confused, but didn't press further. The next morning, announcements carried on as usual. Buffet open at 9, pool games at 11, karaoke in the evening, no mention of the midnight muster. When I checked the ship's daily schedule, there was no record of it, no acknowledgement, but I remembered. I remembered the black tide swallowing screaming passengers. I remembered the woman's sacrifice. I remembered the crew's eyes bottomless and cold. And when I returned to the lounge that afternoon, sipping weak coffee while tourists laughed around me, I noticed something carved faintly into the underside of the table where I sat. 7 words, scratched deep into the wood. "Next time, it will be you." Cruise ships are built on excess. They don't want you to ever feel like you've had enough. Food, drinks, music, distractions. It's all meant to overwhelm you until you stop noticing how strange it feels to be locked on a floating city in the middle of nowhere. I used to love that part. I booked my trip on the Oceanus Glory for that exact reason. Bottomless buffets, midnight snacks, greasy comfort food I'd never let myself eat at home. By the 5th night, though, I couldn't sleep. My cabin felt too hot. The sheets stuck to my skin, and the droning hum of the engines vibrated in my chest like an extra heartbeat. My roommate, Lowell, snored loudly across the room, his open mouth catching the glow of the digital clock. I decided to walk it off. Maybe grab something light from the buffet. Maybe just clear my head. The hallways were quieter than usual, though never silent. Cruise ships never sleep. I passed a few other night wanderers, a drunk couple still in swimsuits, an older man shuffling toward the casino, a teenager with headphones slung around his neck. Everything looked normal, almost boring. I told myself that was a good sign. When I reached the buffet, the doors slid open with their usual hiss. Inside, it was nearly empty. The bright overhead lights made the room feel sterile, like a cafeteria after hours. Stainless steel trays lined the counters, the usual suspects sitting under buzzing heat lamps. Pasta, chicken legs, fries, rolls stacked in a basket. Nothing fancy, but it all looked edible enough. I grabbed a plate. My stomach growled, though when I scooped some pasta, I paused. The noodles glistened in a way I couldn't place, not glossy from oil, not shiny from cheese. They looked slick, almost wet. As I dropped the spoonful onto my plate, I swore the pile shifted like Something moved inside the mound before going still. I shook it off. Maybe I was overtired. Maybe the steam from the lamp played tricks on my eyes. I slid into a booth by the window. Outside, the ocean was pure black, horizonless, the ship's reflection bouncing faintly against the glass. The hum of the engines was louder here, a low vibration in my feet. I poked at the pasta with my fork, not ready to eat. Across the room, a man in a flamingo print shirt sat with a mountain of shrimp piled high on his plate. He ate like he hadn't had a meal in days, sucking down shrimp after shrimp, the tails discarded in a wet heap. Cocktail sauce smeared his chin, but he didn't slow down, didn't even glance at anyone around him. At another table, a young woman gnawed on a chicken leg with manic intensity. Grease dripped down her wrist, her teeth cracking audibly against the bone. She didn't look hungry, so much as desperate, like something inside her demanded more. I pushed my plate away. That's when the man in the flamingo shirt started coughing. At first it was small, just a rough throat clear, then louder, harsher, until his face reddened. He gagged, hacked, and then bent double over the table. A few passengers turned, but no one moved to help. He spat something onto his plate. It writhed. The woman screamed. Chairs scraped against the floor as a few people lurched back, but most just stared. The thing was small, pale, segmented, like a fat white grub curled on his plate. It twitched once, twice, then stilled. Before I could process it, 2 crew members appeared. Their uniforms were immaculate, their faces blank. They seized the man by the arms and yanked him upright with frightening efficiency. "This way, sir," one said, voice flat. The man protested, coughing, shouting, but they ignored him. They dragged him out, leaving his plate behind. One crew member covered the wriggling lump with a napkin and carried it away like it was routine. When the doors shut, silence filled the buffet. Then slowly people went back to eating. Forks scraped plates. Someone laughed nervously. I sat frozen, bile burning my throat. Had no one else seen what I saw? Or had they seen and decided it didn't matter? I returned to the cabin shaken. Lowell groaned when I flipped the light on. "What the hell, man? It's 2 a.m. There was..." I started, but the words died in my throat. What could I even say? That a man coughed up a living thing onto his plate? That crew members whisked him away like it was routine? Lowell would think I'd lost my mind. Instead, I muttered, "Nothing. Couldn't sleep." He rolled over, then quit waking me up. His snores filled the room again in minutes. I sat awake until sunrise. By breakfast, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it. Maybe it was food poisoning. Maybe the man vomited something I only thought looked alive. But then I saw the young woman again. She sat 2 tables over, a fresh plate of eggs and sausage in front of her. She didn't touch it. She just scratched at her arms. Her skin was blotchy, red, streaked with faint blood. As she tore at her sleeve, I caught a glimpse of movement. A ripple beneath the skin. Our eyes met. For a moment, I thought she'd cry out. Instead, she smiled. Wide. Too wide. Her teeth were flecked with red. She leaned to the man beside her and whispered something. He nodded, kept chewing, as if she'd confirmed what he already knew. I left before I vomited. That night, I swore I wouldn't eat. I'd ration the snacks I'd packed, drink water, avoid the buffet. But Lowell didn't care. He came back with a cheeseburger in one hand, fries in the other, grinning like he'd won the lottery. "You're missing out," he said, mouth full. "This ship's got the best food I've ever had." I forced a smile, watching grease drip down his chin. As he chewed, I heard a faint crunch. Not of lettuce or bacon, but something harder, something that didn't belong. I said nothing. At 2 a.m., the scratching returned. Not from inside the cabin, from the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door. The sound was steady, nails dragging against steel. Footsteps followed, heavy, shuffling. I cracked the door. Crew members marched passengers down the hall. The young woman was among them. Her arms were raw, skin split open, pale shapes writhing beneath the surface. Her eyes rolled back white, lips mumbling nonsense. Others followed, hunched and twitching, bodies jerking as though pulled by invisible strings. The crew guided them silently toward the service stairs. None of them came back. By morning, Lowell was gone. His bed was neatly made, sheets tucked, as though no one had ever slept there. His keycard sat on the nightstand, but his suitcase was gone. He hadn't said a word to me, hadn't left a note. For a moment, I convinced myself he'd gone for breakfast early. Maybe he'd met someone, but deep down, I knew. The sound of scratching in the hallway echoed in my head. The way the crew marched the infected out at night. Lowell hadn't left by choice. He'd been taken. I avoided the buffet completely. My stomach screamed at me, twisting itself into knots. But the thought of eating anything on board filled me with dread. I nursed bottles of water, chewed through the last granola bar I'd brought from home, and tried to hold out. But hunger is relentless. It makes you weak, fogs your brain, warps your thoughts. By the 6th day, I could barely walk straight. Every corner of the ship smelled of food. Fried grease, sugary frosting, steaming bread. I avoided passengers, but even in passing I noticed them. People scratching at their necks, twitching in their seats, staring off blankly as their forks shoveled food into their mouths without pause. I kept telling myself I wasn't crazy. I had proof. I saw what came out of that man's throat. I saw the woman's skin ripple. I saw the crew herd them away. But when you're starving, your own body becomes the enemy. That night, wandering half delirious, I stumbled into a service corridor. It was colder there, the walls bare steel, pipes rattling overhead. The smell hit me, damp and sour, like wet earth and rot. At the end of the hall was a door marked Authorized Personnel Only. It hung slightly ajar. I pushed it open. Inside was a cavernous chamber lined with massive tanks. They rose from floor to ceiling, filled with murky liquid. Shapes writhed within. Pale, segmented things the size of my arm curled and uncurled, pressing blindly against the glass. Their bodies pulsed in slow rhythm, their movements sickeningly coordinated, like thousands of lungs breathing as one. Pipes snaked out from the tanks, hissing as they pumped the liquid upward, toward the kitchens, the fountains, the buffets, toward us. My stomach dropped. The ship wasn't feeding us. We were feeding it. A voice came from the shadows. "You weren't chosen." I spun. A crew member stood beside a tank, his uniform immaculate, his smile too wide. His eyes glistened black, reflecting the tank lights. "Not yet," he added. "What are they?" I croaked. My throat was dry, raw. His grin widened. "What keeps the ship alive?" Behind him, the larvae writhed faster, pressing harder against the glass, as though sensing me. I ran. I locked myself in my cabin, heart pounding, skin itching. Every twitch of muscle felt wrong. Hunger tore at me, demanding, burning hotter with every hour. By dawn, I couldn't take it anymore. The buffet was crowded. Passengers laughed, smiled, ate like nothing was wrong. Plates of eggs, bacon, rolls piled high. I told myself I wouldn't touch it, but the smell drove me forward, plate in hand before I realized it. I reached for a bread roll. It was warm in my fingers. I tore it open. Something pale wriggled inside. I dropped it with a gasp. My stomach growled so loud people turned to look. I grabbed another roll, ripped it apart. More writhing, pale bodies squirming beneath the crust. I should have run. Instead, I shoved it into my mouth. Grease and salt exploded across my tongue. And something else, something alive. It writhed against my teeth, squirmed as I chewed, slid down my throat before I could spit it out. Heat spread through my stomach instantly. My skin prickled. I clawed at my arms and felt movement beneath the surface. A wriggle, a pulse. I stumbled back, choking, eyes watering. Passengers around me kept eating, jaws working steadily, their eyes glassy. Crew members watched silently, smiles fixed, as if waiting for me to join them. I caught my reflection in the glass sneeze guard. Something shifted beneath my skin. My smile stretched too wide, and for the first time, I didn't fight it. I never travel without Marisol. She's the only reason I agreed to step foot on the ship in the first place. I'm not a cruise kind of guy. I don't like the ocean, not the endless blue horizon, not the thought of miles of water beneath me. I don't like the way you can stand on deck and see nothing but emptiness in every direction. If I had my way, I would have taken her to the mountains, maybe a cabin by a lake. But Marisol, she has a way of looking at you until you give in. She loved the idea of the cruise, a week with no work, no responsibilities, no phones buzzing at dinner, just the two of us. She said we needed it. She was right. We boarded in Miami. The heat on the pier pressed down like a blanket, and the ship towered over us like a floating city. I was already sweating under my shirt, nerves twisting my stomach, but Marisol's eyes lit up like a kid's. She leaned against the railing as the ship horn bellowed, waving to the crowd on shore, even though none of them knew us. The sun painted the water gold, and the engines hummed beneath our feet. She grabbed my arm and laughed. "Can you believe it? We're finally doing this." I smiled. I always smiled when she looked that happy. The first 2 days passed like a dream for her. We wandered the massive decks, tried cocktails with ridiculous names, sat in lounge chairs by the pool while a band played steel drums. At night, we ate until we couldn't move and then curled up on the balcony to watch the moon trail silver across the waves. I kept my unease quiet. She deserved this. I told myself I'd get used to it. That maybe by the time we docked at the first port, I'd even start enjoying it. On the third night, we went down to the dining hall for dinner. They sat us by the window, a perfect view of the water rolling by in the dark. Marisol ordered salmon. I ordered steak. We spent the evening talking about nothing important. The magician's afternoon show had been laughably bad. She teased me for falling asleep during the trivia contest. I teased her for spilling wine on her dress. It was the kind of night you don't think about when it's happening. Ordinary, comfortable. When I excused myself to use the restroom, she kissed me on the cheek and told me not to get lost. I was gone maybe 5 minutes, 10 at most. When I came back, the table was empty. Her plate was gone. Her glass was gone. Her chair was tucked neatly in. For a moment, I just stood there, stupidly staring. I expected her to come back from the restroom, to pop up behind me laughing, but she didn't. I asked the waiter if he'd seen my wife. He gave me a strange look. "Sir, you came in alone." I frowned. "No, my wife. She was sitting right here. We ordered together." The waiter hesitated, his expression careful, like he was dealing with someone who'd had too much to drink. "You've been seated alone the entire evening." Something cold slid into my stomach. I turned to the couple sitting at the next table. "You saw her, didn't you? The woman I was with?" They looked at me like I was unwell. The man shook his head slowly. "Sorry, just you." I left the dining hall with my heart pounding. I searched every deck I could think of. The casino where the machines chimed and flashed. The lounge where music drifted from the piano. The pool deck where a handful of people smoked under the stars. I called her name over and over, earning looks from strangers, but no answers. By midnight, I stumbled back to our cabin, throat raw, stomach knotted with dread. Her suitcase sat in the corner. Her clothes hung in the closet. The faint scent of her perfume lingered in the air. The balcony door was cracked open, the curtains stirring in the night breeze. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd dreamed everything, that she'd be in bed, reading a book, waiting for me. But the bed was empty. Her phone sat on the nightstand, and when I opened the bathroom door, she was there. Marisol stood at the sink, brushing her hair like nothing had happened. She turned, startled. "What's wrong?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," I stammered. "You weren't at the table. You were gone. No one saw you." She blinked at me, puzzled. "Of course I was there. You just left for a few minutes." I tried to explain, but the words tumbled out broken, panicked. She only laughed softly, set the brush down, and wrapped her arms around me. "You're overthinking again. You always do this." I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her, but the way she said it, calm, almost rehearsed, left a chill deep in my bones. The next morning, she was gone again. Her suitcase still sat in the corner, but when I opened it, it was empty. The closet was bare. The bathroom counter was clear. I stormed down to the front desk, demanded answers. The clerk tapped at his computer, frowned, and shook his head. "Cabin 5427, you're listed as a single passenger, sir." "That's impossible," I snapped. "Check again. My wife is with me." "There's no record of another guest," he said firmly. "Just you." My chest tightened. I pulled out my phone, opened the gallery. I knew I had photos. Us at the railing, us by the pool, her laughing with a drink in her hand. But the pictures were gone. Every single one. The folder where her name should have been was empty. By afternoon, I'd searched the entire ship again. Every lounge, every theater, every shop. No one had seen her. No one remembered her. Some passengers looked at me with pity. Others avoided me entirely. That night, I woke to movement on the balcony. The curtains stirred. Moonlight spilled across the carpet. Marisol stood there, her hair whipping in the wind, her dress fluttering. She turned slowly, her eyes meeting mine through the glass. She mouthed something I couldn't hear. I slid the door open, the cold air rushing in. She was already climbing the railing. "Marisol," I shouted, lunging forward. But by the time I reached her, she was gone. The ocean stretched black and endless below. I leaned over, heart hammering, scanning the waves, and saw her face just beneath the surface, eyes wide, lips moving in silence. Before I could reach for her, the water closed. I didn't sleep after I saw Marisol's face in the water. I sat on the balcony until dawn, my body aching, eyes burning, watching the endless horizon. Every time the moon slipped behind a cloud, I thought I saw her silhouette in the waves, just out of reach. Every time the ship tilted slightly under the swells, I imagined her hand brushing against the hull, following me, waiting. The ocean no longer looked like water. It looked like a black mouth, swallowing sound and light, hiding her somewhere in its throat. By morning, I was trembling with exhaustion. My shirt clung damp to my skin, and the reflection in the glass door looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, broken. But I wasn't going to let the ship win. Not yet. I went straight down to the front desk. I slammed my palms on the counter so hard the clerk jumped. "I want to speak to the captain. Right now." The young man behind the counter blinked rapidly, trying to compose himself. "Sir, is everything all right?" "My wife is missing," I said. My voice was hoarse, shredded from shouting her name all night. "Her name is Marisol. She boarded with me in Miami. You checked us in together. And now," I dragged in a shaking breath, "now she's gone, and every one of you is pretending she was never here." The clerk's eyes flicked toward a security guard standing nearby. The guard, tall and broad-shouldered, started walking over. "Sir," the clerk said carefully, "according to our records, you're a single passenger. Cabin 5427 has always been listed under one name. Yours. If you're feeling unwell, don't you dare." I leaned closer, my voice sharp. "Don't you dare tell me I imagined her. I can still smell her perfume in the room. I can still hear her voice. She was here. She's still here." The guard laid a heavy hand on my shoulder. "Sir, maybe it's best you return to your cabin." I shook him off, glaring at both of them. People in the atrium were watching. I saw their eyes flicking toward me, whispers rippling through the crowd. I didn't care. Let them think I was crazy, at least I remembered. But the guard didn't shove me. He didn't raise his voice. He just stood there, silent, watchful, waiting for me to make the next move. Like he knew eventually I'd give in. And eventually I did. My anger collapsed into helplessness. I backed away, muttering, "She was here. She was here," until I found myself back in the elevator. Fists clenched so tight my nails cut my palms. The cabin looked different when I returned. Her perfume was gone. I pulled open the closet, empty. I dropped to my knees, dragging her suitcase out from the corner. It was still there, but when I unzipped it, nothing remained. No dresses, no sandals, no sun hat she'd bought just for this trip. Empty, like it had always been. I tore through the drawers, the bathroom, even under the bed. Nothing. Not a hairbrush, not a hairpin, not a single trace. My chest heaved as I stood there in the wreckage, the cabin stripped of her. My mind played tricks, throwing memories like knives, her laugh echoing over dinner, her head on my shoulder, on the balcony, the way she tugged my sleeve when she was excited. They felt so real that for a moment, I thought if I turned quickly enough, I'd see her standing right behind me. But when I did, there was only my reflection in the dark glass. I whispered her name until my throat gave out. The next 2 days blurred together. I stopped eating. I stopped sleeping. I wandered the ship like a ghost, drifting through the hallways, my eyes scanning every face I passed. Couples walked arm in arm, smiling, laughing. Children shrieked in the pool. Groups of friends clinked glasses in the bar. Every time I saw a dark head of hair, I thought it might be her. Every time someone turned away too quickly, I imagined it was because they were her, slipping just out of reach. I stood at the railing for hours, staring into the water. I whispered bargains into the wind. Just let me see her again. I don't care what it costs, just once more. Sometimes I thought I heard her voice. Not whispers, not distant echoes, but her, clear as day. I'd spin around and find no one there. A couple nearby would glance at me strangely, but otherwise go on with their drinks and small talk, oblivious to the storm tearing through me. The ship became a prison. Every hallway looked the same. Every smiling face blurred into one, and always, beneath it all, the low thrum of the engines like a heartbeat that wasn't mine, pulsing in time with the waves. On the 5th night, something changed. I woke to a faint sound. Not footsteps, not voices. Paper. The soft hiss of paper sliding across carpet. I sat up, heart racing. A slip of paper lay under the door, stark white against the dark. I scrambled across the floor, snatched it up. In neat handwriting I knew better than my own, were 5 words. Stop looking for me, please. My hands shook, my throat closed. It was her. It had to be her. The curves of the letters, the way she looped her P's. No one could mimic it that perfectly. Tears blurred my vision. I pressed the note to my chest, rocking back and forth. I'm not leaving you, I whispered. I don't care what they say. I don't care what they erase. I'm not leaving you. The next evening, the sea was rougher. The ship groaned under the weight of the swells, tilting just enough that people stumbled as they walked the halls. The sky was a sheet of black, no stars, no moon. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, like the ship itself was holding its breath. Close to midnight, I found myself back on the balcony. The air was colder than it had been all week, sharp with salt. I leaned over the railing, the waves crashing like dark walls below. And then I saw her. Marisol stood on the water, not sinking, not drowning, just standing as if the ocean had turned solid beneath her. Her red dress whipped in the wind, her hair plastered across her face. She lifted one hand, beckoning me. My heart nearly burst out of my chest. Marisol. She shook her head slowly. Her lips moved, silent words carried away by the storm. I climbed the railing before I realized what I was doing. My bare feet slipped on the metal, my hands white-knuckled around the cold bars. The sea roared below, black, and endless. Behind me, I heard the cabin door creak open. "Sir," a calm voice said. "Please step down." I twisted my head. 2 crew members stood inside the room, perfectly still. Their uniforms were spotless, their eyes gleaming dark, reflecting the faint light. Neither blinked, neither moved closer. They just watched me, as if they already knew what choice I'd make. I looked back to the water. She was still there, still waiting. And I didn't hesitate. I let go. The cold hit like knives. The ocean swallowed me, salt stinging my lungs as I fought to surface. I kicked hard, breaking through the waves, coughing, gasping. The ship loomed above, its lights already pulling away. Then hands seized mine, Marisol. She pulled me up, her grip strong, her face inches from mine. Relief tore through me like lightning. I knew. I choked, coughing. I knew you were here. But then I saw her eyes. They weren't hers anymore. They were black, reflective, endless. She smiled. "Now you're mine." The sea closed over us. When I opened my eyes again, I was back on the ship. The atrium glowed with warm light. Passengers bustled around me, laughing, sipping drinks, chattering about excursions. A piano played softly in the corner. Everything looked perfectly normal. Except no one looked at me. I walked past families, past couples, past waiters carrying trays of champagne. Not a single head turned. Not a single eye acknowledged me. It was like I wasn't there. I stopped by a mirror near the staircase. No reflection. Just emptiness. At the front desk, a clerk scrolled through his manifest. "Cabin 5427, he repeated. "Sir, there's no record of you ever boarding this ship." And for the first time, I believed him. I'd been on cruises before. They were always the same. Neon brochures, overpriced excursions, smiling crew members herding you through buffets and bingo nights. Predictable, safe. That's why people like them. The Celestia Maris was supposed to be no different. A week in the Caribbean, round trip. Miami to Nassau, then St. Thomas, then San Juan. A simple loop. I booked it because I needed to get away from everything. The buzzing phone, the coworkers breathing down my neck, the silence of my apartment that sometimes felt louder than any crowd. For the first 2 days, it was exactly what I expected. Deck chairs, sunburned tourists, bottomless margaritas. At night, the dining hall glowed with chandeliers, the sound of forks clinking against plates, the murmur of strangers bonding over shrimp cocktails and cheap wine. I settled into the routine, telling myself this was all I needed. Then, on the 3rd evening, everything changed. I was halfway through dinner when the captain's voice came through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice deep, slow, deliberate. "Tomorrow morning, we will be making a special stop at Port Lerna. This unique destination offers an experience not typically available on commercial cruises. Please consult your updated schedules for excursion options." The dining hall buzzed instantly. Forks froze mid-air. Conversations broke into whispers. I glanced at the brochure I'd shoved into my pocket days earlier. Nassau, St. Thomas, San Juan. That was it. No Port Lerna. Around me, people muttered. A woman pulled out her phone, scrolling through maps. "Where is that?" she asked her husband. He shook his head. At the next table, a man joked, "Maybe it's some private billionaire island. Lucky us." Laughter followed, but it was nervous, thin. I looked at the waitstaff, expecting an explanation, but they moved calmly between tables, topping off glasses, clearing plates. Not one of them reacted to the announcement. Their faces were masks. That night, I couldn't sleep. I wandered up to the pool deck around midnight. The air was cool, the sea black and endless. The ship cut through it like a knife, the wake vanishing into darkness. A few other restless passengers leaned at the railing, murmuring about the announcement. A man in a Hawaiian shirt grinned at me. "Port Lerna," he said. "Sounds exotic. Maybe someplace they just opened up. A hidden gem." I forced a chuckle, but the name scratched at the back of my mind. Lerna. I'd heard it somewhere before, but I couldn't place it. It didn't sound like paradise. It sounded old. Heavy. When I finally went back to my cabin, I left the curtains open. The horizon was empty, black on black. But I couldn't shake the feeling we were heading somewhere we weren't supposed to go. Morning came gray. By the time the announcement told us we were docking, I was already on the observation deck. The island rose out of the mist like a bruise. Jagged black cliffs towered over the water, streaked with pale veins that caught the weak light. The sea churned against them, white foam exploding at their base. Atop the cliffs sprawled a town. Crooked stone buildings hunched against each other, their windows dark, their roofs sagging. No palm trees, no beaches, no color, just gray stone and black shadows, as if the place had been drained of life. And then I saw the statues. They lined the docks. They stood in doorways, on balconies, in the middle of streets. Pale figures frozen in mid-motion, arms raised, mouths open, bodies twisted, dozens of them. Passengers crowded the glass, snapping pictures. Creepy, someone laughed. But my stomach turned cold. These weren't the marble heroes you see in plazas. They weren't beautiful. They were desperate. The ship slowed, its thrusters groaning. Crew members lowered the gangway with practiced precision. But there were no welcoming smiles. Their faces stayed blank, their voices flat as they directed groups toward the exit. Every instinct screamed at me to stay on board. But I didn't. The moment I stepped onto the dock, the air hit me. It was damp, heavy, metallic. My mouth tasted of pennies. Beneath it was something sour, rotten, like algae left too long in the sun. Up close, the statues were worse. A woman crouched low, clutching something to her chest, her face twisted in horror. A man sprawled on the ground, arms raised, stone fingers digging into his own hair. A child mid-run, her mouth frozen in a silent cry. I touched one against my better judgment. The surface was rough, salt-worn, but the detail was grotesquely precise. Fingernails, teeth, creases in clothing. The thought hit me like a hammer. These weren't carved. They looked like people. Our guide, a young man in a crisp cruise line polo, waved us up the main street. His voice was monotone, rehearsed. "Welcome to Port Lerna, a historic settlement founded in the 18th century. Once a thriving trade hub." His words slid past me like static. The buildings loomed too large, their shutters hanging, their doors warped. Curtains fluttered in stale breezes. Every window was black, every doorway hollow. The silence pressed in. No birds, no dogs, just our footsteps. Halfway up the hill, we stopped at a plaza. More statues filled the square, dozens of them scattered across cracked stones, some standing, some kneeling, some collapsed mid-stride. Their faces twisted in terror. I moved closer to one, a young woman with her hands outstretched, her mouth wide. Salt streaked her stone cheeks like dried tears. My chest tightened. Then I froze. Across the plaza, leaning against a wall, was a man in a green shirt. His head tilted back, his lips parted. Recognition hit me like a punch. The night before, at dinner, he'd been 2 tables away. Loud, laughing, raising his glass too often. His watch had gleamed under the chandelier. Now he was stone. His mouth frozen in a half-scream, his eyes wide with horror. It wasn't a resemblance. It was him. My knees went weak. I stumbled back, nearly colliding with another statue. A boy nearby tugged his mother's sleeve and whispered, "Mom, that's the man from the buffet." Her eyes widened, but she hushed him quickly. The guide didn't pause, didn't acknowledge it. His monotone carried on. Unique opportunity for cultural appreciation. I forced myself to look around. Our group had been 30 when we left the ship. Now, 23, maybe 22. The others were gone, and no one said a word. I couldn't shake the numbers. 30 had left the ship. 20-something stood in the plaza now. My head throbbed with the math, my eyes darting between strangers, trying to count them again and again as if maybe I'd miscalculated. But every time I looked, there were fewer. The guide didn't falter. He led us down a side street lined with leaning houses, his monotone unbroken. This road once served as the main market avenue. Merchants would have gathered here. His words barely registered. My eyes were on the windows above, black as sockets, curtains fluttering though no one was inside. Shadows seemed to retreat as I looked up at them, as if something just out of sight had slipped deeper into the buildings. A woman beside me whispered, "My husband. He was just here. He was right here." Her voice cracked, desperate. She turned in circles, eyes wide, searching the thinning crowd. "He was right." She froze. Her breath hitched. Her hand flew to her mouth. I followed her gaze. There, at the corner of the street, stood a new statue. A man with his arm raised, his mouth stretched wide in panic. His features roughened by stone, but unmistakable. Her husband. The woman staggered toward him, sobbing, but 2 crew members appeared from nowhere. They caught her by the arms, smiling thinly, their voices calm. "Ma'am, this way. Please, this way." She kicked, screamed, begged. They didn't loosen their grip. They guided her back down toward the docks. And then she was gone. The crowd stayed silent. By the time we reached the waterfront again, we were fewer still. The ship towered above us, gleaming white, immaculate. Against the decay of the town, it looked unreal, too clean, too perfect. The guide dismissed us with the same flat words. "Thank you for visiting Port Lerna. Please return to the ship for refreshments." Passengers shuffled back on board. No chatter, no laughter, just the slap of shoes on metal. I lingered on the dock, my eyes drawn helplessly to the statues, their faces twisted, their arms reaching. And among them, unmistakable now, stood the woman's husband, his terror immortalized. When I finally forced myself back up the gangway, my legs felt like lead. Dinner that night was quieter. Entire tables sat empty, though no one mentioned it. Waiters served courses with polite smiles, clearing extra chairs as though they had never been filled. A man across the room raised his voice, demanding to know where his wife had gone. "She was here last night, right here, at this table. You served her." The waiter's smile never faltered. "Sir, you are traveling alone." The man's face crumpled. He screamed, pounding his fists against the table. Crew members appeared instantly, hands firm on his shoulders. They lifted him smoothly, guiding him out as if he were no more troublesome than a drunk. His cries echoed through the dining hall. Then they cut off. When I looked back, his table had only one plate. His wife's had never existed. That night, I barely slept. I woke before dawn, drawn to the railing. My breath froze in my chest. The cliffs were still there. The town still hunched against the hillside. The statue stood waiting. We hadn't left. Hours passed. Passengers shuffled the decks with vacant eyes, their conversations hollow. Some laughed too loudly, too suddenly, their voices brittle. Others sat in silence, staring at the horizon. The air grew heavier, damp, metallic. Every breath tasted wrong. And then I saw them. New statues. On the docks, in the streets, on balconies. Faces I recognized. A couple I'd played trivia with. A boy who'd splashed in the pool. The man who had screamed about his wife. All of them frozen in stone. By the 5th day, the halls were emptier. Cabins stood open, stripped bare. Reservation cards showed single names where there had been families. No one spoke about it. I stayed in my cabin, the door locked, curtains drawn, but the silence pressed in, thick and suffocating. Every creak of the ship made me flinch. When the knock came, I knew. 2 crew members stood there, smiling politely. "Sir, it's time for your excursion." "I already went," I stammered. My voice was thin, shaking. "I'm not—" Their smiles didn't falter. "It's time." Hands gripped my arms, cold and firm. I struggled, shouting, but the hall was empty. No one came. No one ever came. They dragged me down the corridors, through the atrium, past passengers who stared blankly ahead. Their eyes glazed, their faces calm, as if they couldn't even see me. The gangway loomed. The air outside was heavier, metallic, suffocating. The city waited, silent and hungry. And then I saw her. Among the statues on the dock, my sister. She'd convinced me to take this cruise, said it would be fun, said I needed a break. I'd teased her for overpacking, for bringing too many books. She'd laughed the first night, clinking glasses with me at the bar. Now she stood motionless, her face twisted in terror, her hand outstretched as if she'd been reaching for me. My heart broke in my chest. I screamed her name until my throat tore, but the crew didn't loosen their grip. They guided me forward, step by step, toward the empty space beside her. A space shaped exactly for me. The air thickened, solidifying against my skin. My lungs burned, my legs stiffened. The last thing I saw was her eyes, stone gray, eternal, locked on mine, and then nothing but silence. The first time I heard it, I thought it was just the sea. Every cruise ship hums. Engines throb beneath the decks. Water slaps against steel. Pipes groan. And metal sings faintly when the waves hit just right. But this was different. It was close to midnight when I woke in my cabin to the faintest sound threading through the wall. At first it was a hum, low and steady, like wind caught in a tunnel. I turned onto my side, pressing my ear against the bulkhead. The cold bit into my skin. That's when I realized it wasn't just a hum. It was voices. Dozens of them, maybe more. They weren't clear, not words I could make out, but they rose and fell together in a cadence too deliberate to be noise. A mournful swell, like a hymn carried from underwater. My throat went dry. I pulled back, sitting up in the dark. The air smelled faintly of brine and rust, sharper than it should have inside a climate-controlled cabin. I told myself it was nothing. The sea playing tricks, waves pounding against the hull, my tired brain shaping patterns where there weren't any. But I couldn't shake it. I stayed awake the rest of the night, listening. And the longer I listened, the more certain I became. Those weren't waves. They were voices. The next morning, the ship looked unchanged. Sunlight glared off the white decks. Passengers shuffled to the buffet, bleary-eyed, balancing plates stacked with bacon and waffles. Children squealed in the pool. Crew members smiled, their uniforms crisp, their voices cheerful. Everything looked normal, but people's eyes told a different story. At the table beside me, a woman sat frozen over her toast, her fork untouched. Her head tilted slightly toward the wall, as though listening. When her husband brushed her arm, she startled so badly she knocked her cup to the floor. Coffee spread across the carpet, but she didn't even glance down. Her lips trembled. I heard her whisper, "It's in the metal." Her husband's face blanched. He leaned close, his voice sharp, urgent. "Not here. Don't talk about it here." She lowered her head quickly, eyes darting toward the crew members, moving between tables. My stomach twisted. That night, the voices came again, louder, closer. I lay in bed, sheets damp with sweat, staring at the ceiling. The sound swelled through the walls, weaving in mournful waves. I pressed my palm against the metal. It thrummed beneath my skin, vibrating in time with the voices. The melody twisted, dissonant, rising in strange intervals that made my teeth ache. I couldn't take it. I threw on clothes and stepped into the corridor. I wasn't the only one. Doors cracked open up and down the hall. Pale faces peered out. A child whispered, "Mommy." They're singing again. The mother's voice snapped back, low and desperate. "Don't answer them. Do you hear me? Don't you ever answer them." A man across the hall pounded the wall with his fist, shouting, "Shut up. Just shut up." The voices surged in reply, as though mocking him. The corridor seemed to vibrate with their swell. I hurried away, my heart slamming. By the third day, the entire ship was restless. At breakfast, conversations faltered mid-sentence as tremors rippled through the walls. Chandeliers quivered faintly overhead, though the sea outside lay flat as glass. Passengers pretended nothing was wrong, but their bodies betrayed them. Jaws clenched, hands shook, eyes darted to corners where the sound pressed strongest. The captain made no announcement. The daily itinerary still listed pool games at noon and ballroom dance at 7 now. Crew members served cocktails with practiced smiles, but those smiles were brittle, their eyes flat and dark. That evening, I sat in the lounge trying to drown my nerves in whiskey. A man at the bar leaned close, his whisper urgent. "They're under us," he said. His eyes were bloodshot, his voice shaking. "All of them. The ones who never made it home. That's who you hear. They're inside the ship now." Before I could answer, his wife tugged his sleeve sharply, shushing him. She gave me a tight smile, forced a laugh, and said loudly, "Ignore him. Too many drinks." But her hand trembled as she set down her glass. That night, the music was everywhere, not just in the cabins, but in the floors, the ceilings, the very rails of the ship. If you touched metal, you felt it. A faint pulse thrumming against your skin, like a heartbeat that wasn't yours. I tried to sleep with pillows over my head, but the voices pushed through, louder, closer. And then I heard it. My name, clear, drawn out, threaded through the choir like a single note piercing a chord. My blood turned to ice. I sat up so fast my vision spun. I hadn't told anyone my name, not passengers, not crew. My booking had been under initials only. And yet, the voices in the walls sang it. I stumbled into the corridor. Other doors opened too. People stood barefoot, trembling, eyes wide and wet. An elderly man clutched a rosary, muttering prayers. A young woman covered her ears, sobbing. Children cried in their parents' arms. The walls shook faintly. Salt water dripped from seams in the ceiling. The air reeked of brine and iron. Crew members appeared calm as mannequins. Their voices were soft, soothing. "Please return to your cabins, everything is fine." But their eyes were wide and unblinking like they were listening too. By the fourth day, the pool deck was empty. The buffet half deserted. Passengers wandered the halls in silence, their faces pale, their bodies hunched. Some covered their ears with their hands, whispering to themselves. Others just stood by the rails, staring into the sea as if waiting for something to rise. I pressed my palms against the railing, trying to ground myself. The metal was damp. When I pulled my hands back, they glistened with seawater. Beside me, a woman muttered, without looking up, "They want us. Every voyage. Every time." I turned to ask what she meant, but she was gone. Not walked away. Not blended into the crowd. Gone. The railing where she'd stood dripped steady with salt water. That night, I refused to listen. I stuffed tissue into my ears, buried my head beneath pillows, anything to block it out. But it seeped through, always. The choir swelled, rising and falling in impossible harmonies. The walls vibrated with it, the floor trembling faintly under my feet. And then I heard a voice I knew, not vague, not a trick of memory, clear, familiar, soft. My mother's voice, calling my name. Her voice didn't come from outside the cabin. It didn't drift faintly from the corridor. It came from inside the walls. "Tyler." My chest tightened so hard it hurt. My mother had been dead for 3 years. I'd stood over her casket. I'd watched the dirt fall, and yet, here her voice was, soft and clear, humming through the steel. I whispered into the dark, "You're not real." The choir answered. The walls pulsed with a swell of voices layered, surging like a tide. My mother's voice threaded through them, calling again, "Tyler!" The sound pressed into my skull, into my bones, until I staggered backward, palms pressed over my ears. Something dripped onto my shoulder. I looked up. A thin line of seawater slid from the ceiling, pattering onto the carpet. The drip quickened, spreading into rivulets. The air grew damp and cold. I fled the cabin. The corridor was chaos. Passengers ran barefoot, some clutching suitcases, others screaming. Water seeped from seams in the walls, streaking the wallpaper dark. The lights flickered overhead, casting the hall in sickly flashes. A man shouted, "The lifeboats! Get to the lifeboats!" But another voice, high and trembling, screamed, "No! They won't let us leave." I stumbled toward the stairwell. The air smelled of salt and rot. Every surface I touched was wet. On the landing, a group of passengers huddled, their eyes wide. One of them, a young woman, whispered frantically, "They're in the water. They've always been in the water. The ship feeds them." Her words burrowed into me like ice. The upper deck was worse. Rain hammered from a sky that had been clear minutes earlier. Waves crashed against the hull with impossible force, though the sea should have been calm. Passengers screamed as they fought toward the lifeboats. But the lifeboats weren't there. The davits hung empty, ropes dangling uselessly. Someone cried, "They're gone! The boats are gone!" And then the singing rose above the storm. It poured from the ocean itself, a wall of voices, rising and falling in mournful harmony, louder than thunder, louder than wind. The deck trembled with it. The steel groaned like it was alive. Passengers dropped to their knees, sobbing. Some clutched their heads. Others pressed their hands against the rails, their faces blank, as though hypnotized. One by one, they stepped forward and climbed over the edge. I lunged, grabbing a man's arm. "Stop! What are you doing?" His eyes met mine. They were gray, flat, storm cloud gray. "They're calling," he whispered. And then he wrenched free and vanished into the black waves below. I staggered back, heart slamming. The ocean boiled with movement. Shapes writhed beneath the surface, human silhouettes thrashing, reaching, climbing. Their mouths opened, spilling song into the storm. The drowned. Their faces surfaced for split seconds, pale, water-swollen, eyes wide and blank. Some were modern, dressed in cruise attire. Others were older, their clothes tattered, uniforms from ships that sank decades ago, all sang together, the harmony a knife against my skull. The deck tilted violently. I slammed against the railing, the metal slick beneath my hands. From the corner of my eye, I saw crew members standing perfectly still, not helping, not panicking, just staring out at the sea, lips moving faintly, as if mouthing the words to the song. I fled downward, desperate for silence. The lower decks were worse. Water seeped through cracks, gushing in steady streams. Cabins stood empty, doors yawning wide, belongings scattered across soaked carpets, and the voices were louder here. I stumbled into the ballroom. It was flooded ankle-deep, chandeliers swaying overhead. Tables floated, chairs tipped, but passengers still sat in them, motionless, their heads tilted back, mouths open in silent song. Their eyes were gone, hollow sockets staring at the ceiling. I waded backward, choking down a scream. The water rose around my legs, freezing, pulling. In its reflection, the chandeliers didn't sway. They hung still, casting steady light. And in that reflection, I saw dozens of faces peering up from beneath the surface. They smiled. I bolted, crashing through the water, slipping on the slick floor. Behind me, chairs scraped, bodies rising from the waterlogged feast. The song swelled louder. It was inside my head now, filling every thought, every nerve. I staggered into a stairwell and froze. At the top of the stairs, blocking my path, stood my mother. Her hair was dripping, plastered to her face. Her skin was pale, waterlogged. But her eyes were the same, kind, familiar. She reached a trembling hand toward me. "Come with me, Tyler, please. You don't have to fight it anymore." Tears blurred my vision. My chest ached. But then her lips parted, and I saw water gush from her mouth. Not words, not breath. Just seawater pouring endlessly, splashing down the steps. Her eyes flickered, turned gray. She smiled too wide. The choir roared. I ran. Every corridor was flooding now. Water gushed from vents, spilled from ceilings, roared down stairwells. Passengers clawed at doors, screaming, but when I pulled one open, there was no room beyond, only black water, stretching forever. The ship groaned deep, a shudder that rattled my bones. And then from the walls, a new sound emerged. Not just singing, screaming. Voices twisted, rising into shrieks of agony tearing through my skull. My vision blurred. My knees buckled. I fell to the wet carpet, clutching my head. The screaming shifted suddenly into harmony again, beautiful and terrible, rising like a wave. And threaded through it, soft, deliberate, came my name. Tyler. I forced myself up, staggering toward the bow. The ship tilted steeply, water pouring down every corridor. The choir pounded in my skull, every note a blade. When I burst onto the forward deck, the storm hit me full force. Rain slashed, waves towered, lightning split the sky. And out there, ahead of us, was another ship. But it wasn't moving. It was a wreck, half submerged, rusted, broken in two. And yet, lights glowed faintly in its windows. Figures crowded its decks, pale and still, their heads tilted back as they sang. Our ship lurched toward it, drawn like a magnet. The drowned weren't just in the water. They had ships of their own, ghost convoys, endless waiting, and we were being pulled in to join them. I gripped the railing, rain stinging my face, salt clogging my throat. Behind me, passengers spilled onto the deck, their movements jerky, their eyes blank. Crew members followed, their smiles stretched too wide. The choir thundered. My mother's voice rose above it all, soft, pleading, "Come home, Tyler." The sea surged up over the deck, swallowing screams. Shapes writhed in the water, arms reaching, pulling, dragging. I fought to hold on, my knuckles white on the slick rail. My body trembled, lungs burning. And then I felt hands, cold, wet, pulling at my wrists, prying me free. I looked down. Pale faces stared up from the flood, mouths open, singing. One final pull, and I was gone.